Questions of Doom.
Hello and welcome back to another Questions of Doom. In this series, as ever, I attempt to answer questions that you send my way using the archaeosoup@gmail.com email address as displayed on the YouTube channel homepage, but also, as we'll see at the end of this video. In answering these questions by video, it is my fond hope that the answer is made useful not only to the person who has asked the question, but also anyone else out there who may be wondering the same thing. Now, today's question is as a result of visiting a very famous monument in Italy. And it goes like this, it's quite a long one. Hi, Mr. Soup. I really enjoy your meanderings through the world of archaeology, so I thought I'd ask you about Pompeii. Not particularly the events of the calamity, but the preservation and presentation of the site. My wife and I went there a few years ago, and I was somewhat surprised by the paucity of information presented at each of the buildings, and the extremely poor state of what there was, i.e. a few A4 sheets of paper, often unreadable due to rainwater getting into the rubbishy, didn't say rubbishy, but nonetheless rubbishy, plastic holders, many artefacts, and the casts of the bodies for which Pompeii is noted were poorly laid out behind wire screens, making them difficult to appreciate. I thought if this was in the UK, there would be stacks of info, special presentation cases, signs, maps, etc. I'm guessing that a lot of money going into a place like that, Pompeii that is creamed off by local gangsters. And actually I was surprised how cheap it was to get into a world-class heritage site. It was around €12 if I remember correctly. Your thoughts? Regards, Dave. Well, Dave, that's a very provocative question. I imagine any Italians watching may be slightly about this, but I shall attempt to answer this in as fair a way as possible. First of all, when you mention the standard of British museums and displays on heritage, this does vary. I mean, it's definitely not excellent across the board. There are smaller museums out there with very little funding who have to make do and mend with what they've got. In some cases, the displays are from the 60s and 70s, and once I saw a very delicate object being suspended in a cabinet above some felt on corkboard, and it was being suspended by some very dodgy-looking fishing wire. So, it could at any moment just fall and break. So, it's by no means excellent across the board here in Britain. However, what I would say is that, you to a certain extent, you're right. Most of the key monuments and museums do benefit from a lot of funding, not least from the lottery in some way or another. Heritage funding does an awful lot in that respect. For increasing our ability to look after, to maintain, and also to present and disseminate information to the public. So there is a difference in terms of standard, but I suspect this is partly just because of the funding mechanism. It's most notable. It's probably worthwhile saying that the standard of many museums in Britain is not necessarily down to the government or even local government. It's often down to private applications for funding, and often to bodies such as the National Lottery or various other organisations. So it's deceptively simple in Britain, but it's by no means across the board, and it's not taken for granted. An awful lot of hard work goes into applying for this money. My thoughts with regards to Pompeii, well, it's complicated. Once again, it's very complicated because we're talking about a monument or an area which is not only of international significance and internationally famous, therefore, but also earlier this year you may have come across news stories where Pompeii is very much in danger. I mean, there are sections which are collapsing due to essentially not enough funding. This isn't necessarily because of, as you put it, local gangsters creaming off the money. I wouldn't necessarily want to try and infer that Pompeii is linked with the mafia or something, but what I would say is that we all know the situation that the Italian government is in. Mario Monti is not in an easy place right now. He's trying to balance the books of the country, and unfortunately, famously, monuments are suffering. Recently, actually, there was a news story with regard to the Colosseum in Rome. It was leaning. People were panicking because they thought it might fall over, and it's managed to gain some private funding, which hopefully will go through. So maybe that's a way forward for Pompeii. As far as information being displayed, you're quite right. That is a poor show, as it were. If people turn up from around the world, they want to see information well displayed. But I don't know, so I'm just guessing. I mean, were those A4 sheets possibly in areas rather which were still being examined, being excavated, and therefore permanent display wasn't yet ready? It may simply be a lack of money, but it may also be a case of Pompeii, I imagine, in certain places, is still very much changing in terms of what we know about it. So maybe having a permanent display, which isn't so susceptible to rainwater, may simply be uneconomical in that respect. But if it's not the case, if that was the permanent display and it's just ruined by rainwater, that is a real shame. As far as the displays of these world famous casts, unfortunately I haven't been to Pompeii. I do have a little bit of lava rock from there, which a friend of mine smuggled back to back to Britain, and I have seen photos of the displays that you're talking about, and that does seem to be a real shame. But that's because it's getting on now. I mean, it's been a while since those finds were discovered and therefore put on show. So maybe that's not necessarily. I dare say the people, if they had the opportunity and the money to redo that display, they probably would. But again, I suspect the budget for Italy's heritage is plummeting, much as it is and has been at risk in Britain. So therefore, again, it's one of those things. They do have outdated displays. It is a real shame because we all want to see these world famous and vitally important artifacts and casts and people. And actually, I suppose there's another element there, and that is it disrespectful of these folk who essentially we're looking at and who are being put on display, to display them in anything other than a top-notch situation? Or should we not be displaying them at all? But that's a whole other debate entirely. I once actually knew, when I was at uni, there was a lecturer who was very much, he was an advisor to English Heritage on how to display and how to talk about and how to put up information boards about their monuments across the country. And he was very passionate about experimenting, actually. And one of the things I remember him having a bit of a crazy-eyed rant about was font. The notion that perhaps it might be an idea actually to have different fonts at different sites, or even different fonts for different time periods. One of the things that drove him up utterly potty was the fact that no matter where you went in Britain, if you went to an English Heritage monument, the information board was most likely going to be displayed with a very certain artist who usually does most of the pictures for all the monuments and properties, and the font will be Helvetica or something like that, very standard and very, as he put it, very boring. And he wanted to see more variation. So maybe that's a way round actually this issue, is actually to try and see Pompeii as a unique monument, and therefore a unique opportunity to display and disseminate the information. Maybe have some fun with it, see what one can do with the art found at Pompeii, perhaps intermingle that with information, see where that takes you. Maybe that's the problem. Maybe what they need is not only an injection of money, but maybe an injection of imagination. Who knows? I know that that particular lecturer would certainly go "Argh!" and just sort of I want to fix it. So yeah, who knows? Also, actually, it's worthwhile bearing in mind the importance of having information available for the visually impaired, blind, the deaf. People love, indeed children love, never mind just people who can't experience a sight in a conventional way. They love to touch things. I love to touch things, frankly. If I could, I'd touch everything in every museum I went to. So maybe having more interactivity, maybe casts of artifacts that you can actually hold and experience the texture of, or just reproductions, and but nonetheless, all of this feeds into that idea of I suppose, trying to reimagine how the site is presented. And Pompeii, of all places, is surely an excellent place to give that a go, I guess. There's also just the general care of the site, and it sounds as though, once again, this comes down to budget. In the case of Pompeii, they are famously struggling. So, and obviously you went last year. Let's check that. Yes. And no, so a few years ago, sorry. But still, I imagine that this has been building up for, well, a few years. I mean, the monetary crisis globally has been happening for at least 3 years, if not more. Isn't that depressing? So I suppose you shouldn't be too hard on Pompeii. But what I would say is that my thoughts in general about the dissemination of information and the display of a site are that we need to be more innovative. We need to be more exciting. We need to be more imaginative in the way that we do these things. Because frankly, these sites inspire us, and we should therefore try to inspire others about these sites. So there you go. Thank you very much for asking the question, Dave. Hopefully I've gone some way to answering it. Do feel free, incidentally, anyone out there who has any thoughts, to comment below. I'm sure Dave would love to know what other people think. And there we go. So thanks again for asking, and until next time, guys, bye-bye.